Hello and welcome to Rare Vision Reflections. Rare Vision Reflection is about critical analysis, reflections, and thoughts on some historical and contemporary events and issues that have impacted on our community and nations in the past, which still influence us today and can impact on our future. I once again like to thank Shri Shravanand Harinandan Singh Ji from Holland for his encouragement and support for this series. In the first two episodes, I have talked about doctrine of discovery, the beginning of doctrine of discovery, and how it works, and how its implications have influenced lands and people of color. Today, I'm going to talk about the doctrine of dehumanization and the concept of terra nullius for invasions, colonization, human trafficking for profiting by the colonizers of the land and people of color. As you can see, the picture on the left says dehumanization, although a concrete historical fact, is not a given destiny, but the result of an unjust order that endangers violence in the oppressors, which in turn dehumanizes the oppressed. In order to understand this vast subject, one has to understand several key ideas, concepts, and strategies used by the colonizers in order to achieve their inhuman aims and objectives. In this paper, I have space for only a brief introduction to the main ones. I propose to expand them later in my later works. In this context, dehumanization is defined as the denial of the full humanness in others and the cruelty and suffering that accompanies it. A practical definition refers to it as the viewing and treatment of other persons as though they lack the mental capacities that are commonly attributed to human beings. In this definition, every act or thought that regards a person as less human is dehumanization. Dehumanization is one technique in incitement to genocide. It has also been used to justify war, judicial and extrajudicial killings, slavery, the confiscation of property, denial of suffrage, and other rights, and to attack enemies or political opponents. I have given references to all these things in my paper, which is now available on my academia.edu webpage. So if anybody wants to look at the references, they can visit my page on academia.edu. The doctrine of discovery was the international law that gave license to explorers to claim vacant land, which is called terra nullius, in the name of their sovereign. Vacant land was that which was not populated by Christians. The European colonizers of this land and the peoples of the non-European unilaterally developed the doctrine of terra nullius in order to achieve their goals. The defined terra nullius land is legally deemed to be unoccupied or uninhabited. For example, the British colonization and subsequent Australian land Laws were established on the claim that Australia was terra nullius, justifying acquisition by the British occupation without treaty or payment. The same concept was used to colonize South America, North America, Canada, New Zealand, African subcontinent. India too was colonized using the concept of subhuman. I will prove that the same concepts were used by the Europeans living in the British colony Australia to colonize Fiji. There is a distinct relationship between the European concept of dehumanization and the doctrine of discovery and the doctrine of terra nullius. These are interdependent upon each other and provided the Europeans the legal and moral basis to invade, commit genocide, and colonize people of color globally and engage in massive trade of human trafficking of the peoples of color as well as their own kinds for profiteering. This picture shows how Australia was first claimed as terra nullius. Similar pictures can be seen when the Europeans went to colonize Americas and other colonies. There are several crucial factors that have combined to propel towards the post-1492 colonization of the lands of people of color. Together with the Europeans, the concept of dehumanization and the doctrine of discovery and the doctrine of terra nullius, these factors also contributed towards what history has called the civilization mission of Europeans. The first of these factors is long and vast experience in warfare in Europe. There has been a very long history of wars of domination of our lands and people of Europe for more than 700 years. I have space to provide examples of only a few of them in order to illustrate my point here. And the Telheim death pit in Germany, discovered in 1983, was a mass grave found in a linear pottery culture settlement dates back to about 5000 BCE. The pit contained the remains of 34 bodies, and evidence points towards the first sign of organized violence in early Neolithic Europe. The Roman-Etruscan wars were a series of wars fought between ancient Rome. The conquest of Etruria was completed in 265 to 264 BCE. The siege of Naxos had started in 499 BC. This was an attempt by the Milesian tyrant Aristobulus, operating with support from the Persian Emperor Darius the Great, was the opening act of the Greco-Persian War, which had lasted for 50 years. This was followed by the Gothic War against the Eastern Roman Empire from 376 to 382 BC, and in particular, the Battle of Adrianople is commonly seen as the major turning point in the history of Roman Empire. It was one of the many Gothic wars with the Roman Empire. And the Roman conquest of Britain began in earnest in AD 43 under Emperor Claudius and was largely completed in the southern half of Britain by 87 AD, when the Stanegate was established, which refers to the conquest of Ireland of Britain by the occupying Roman forces. The 11th century Norman conquest was the invasion and occupation of England by an army made up of thousands of Normans, Britons, Flemish, and men from the French provinces, all led by Duke of Normandy, later styled William the Conqueror. The above is the very short history of wars in Europe, which also included two world wars and the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. In a recent online interview, Professor Noam Chomsky mentioned Europe's savage and monstrous history. In my view, this statement aptly describes the 7,000 years of war history of Europe. And I feel that the conquest, the invasions, and the fighting, the battles amongst each other for acquisition of land and looting had firmly been established in the Western Europe by the time they started their conquest of the people of color in 1492. In my later work, I will inform you that Western Europe was the last place in the world which was civilized. The civilization had moved from east, from India, from China, through to Persia, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Egypt. Finally, to Crete. The first civilization was Minoan, and then it went to Greece. And that was long after the eastern countries had been civilized. I will stop here now. In the next session, I'll continue with the Doctrine of Discovery series, and I'll talk about the second factor which contributed towards the 1492 event, and that is construction of long voyage ships and other factors. For now, thanks for watching this video. If you think it is beneficial and will assist others to understand the history and how this ancient history impacted upon the peoples of color and their conquest, their genocide, and how the land was taken and they were relegated to living in poverty, on reserves, and so on. And please share. And if you want to have more of these videos from me, please do send your comments and subscribe to my channel. Thank you again. This is goodbye from me, Satish Rai. Watching.